I'm Laura, fertility coach and holistic therapist, founder of Fertility Avenue, providing emotional, physical, and well-being support to women who are having a difficult fertility journey. Welcome to today's podcast episode, which I've called Holding Her, Holding Me, a man's voice in fertility and supporting your partner without losing yourself, where we're going to hold space for a conversation that doesn't often happen enough. So today, joining me, I'm super excited and honored to have on this podcast episode a former NFL player and now fierce advocate for men's mental health in the fertility space, Corey Parchman. Corey, a huge welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on your podcast.
It's brilliant that you've reached out to me because generally it's the women that reach out and not very often the men. So, Corey, if you're happy to talk about your powerful fertility journey that you and your wife have recently been through, because I think it's something that we need to advocate out there, how important it is for the male partner to be able to openly explore their emotions and feelings and talk about this, and also how to support your partner whilst going through a difficult fertility journey, but also not lose yourself in the process. So are you happy to give a little bit of background about your fertility journey with you and your wife and how you found it all?
Sure. But before we get started, I'd like to thank you for opening up this space, giving myself and others the opportunity to speak. I think it's well needed. It's something that I really appreciate because I want to get the word out as much as possible. And I was very intentional about who I reached out to because I want to make sure they're organizations that were authentic and really believed in their mission. So I thank you for this platform and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. So my wife and I experienced IVF. It was a male factor infertility. We went through about 3.5, 4 years of IVF. And the reason why, I'll plug the book, shamelessly plug. The reason why I wrote the book, it wasn't, and initially, I didn't write it until, we actually had our son, because I was still processing the entire experience. It didn't even cross my mind to write a book. But at the end, I started to journal and write out and kind of like do a thought process of what we went through, and it became a book. But in that process, it became, what would I want someone to tell me if I asked them what was IVF like from a male perspective? Yep. So it's kind of how I wrote the book from that aspect of, because I didn't know what to expect. IVF is not, like you said, not much talked about, especially from the male aspect. So you kind of go into it based off of statistics that you may see about, success rates and health and things of that nature. But the actual emotional aspect of it, had no idea what I was going through. Initially just being told that it's a male factor. And what I call is called an asomatic. What it means is I have a blockage somewhere and they can't find out where it is. So they had to extract semen from me in order to make it happen. But just hearing, it was male factor was tough.
Absolutely. And how did you deal with that? So it was,
Yeah. So once again, when they tell you that it's male factor, that you have an issue, it's a shock to the system because initially you go in for the semen analysis. And, that process is interesting because you go into a clinic and, you think everyone's looking at you, but actually no one's looking at you. But you think that, okay, I'm about to go into this clinic and do a semen analysis. Yes. And everyone's staring at me. So you go to the clinic, you're a little bit insecure about that. Then once you kind of go through the experience and then you have to start the process of finding out what's going on. My process was I did a semen analysis and it came back, nothing was going on. So they said the next step was go see a specialist. I'm like, go see a specialist. So then your perspective of if I'm going to have kids start to change because, they don't know what's going on. So I see a specialist, we do a number of tests and come to find out my body does produce it. It's just a blockage somewhere.
Right.
So it's like, okay, that's a little bit of sigh of relief. But who do I talk to about this? You're not at the bar talking to your friends or at a sporting event talking to your friends about I have male factor infertility.
Yeah, a huge subject that not many men are happy to talk about and be open about. And also psychological impact that must have had on you and perhaps the relationship between you and your wife. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, so you definitely got to have to hold it all in, which you shouldn't. You have to figure out how to process it. And just, I think the important thing is to maybe find other men who may go through something similar so you guys can have that commonality and talk yourself through it. My wife was amazing, was very supportive. So that made it a little easier with her being supportive, but still mentally in my mind, I'm the weakest link,
Absolutely. And that
on the
must have had
team.
that feeling of helplessness, so it's not sure where to go and what to do and how to be supportive to your wife but to yourself as well.
Yeah, so I basically had to throw out every aspect of the word masculinity and create a new definition for myself.
Hmm.
Masculinity meant, being a tough guy and taking care of your family and being in charge and leading in a positive way. But at the same time, I'd
Absolutely.
realize that sometimes, being masculine is being open, being masculine is sharing with your wife how you feeling, and being masculine is also being vulnerable. So this
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
vulnerable situation for me to have to realize that I have an issue that may prevent me from having kids. That was a very
absolutely.
vulnerable situation for me, especially someone like me who's always thought about having a legacy or things of that nature.
And that vulnerability, how did that actually make, if you had to dig deep and describe it, how would you tell our listeners, what that vulnerability looked like and felt like for you?
Um, Once again, just being open with yourself, and then
Yeah.
realize you're not the only one on the planet going through something like this. That helped out a lot, being vulnerable, but also realize that, there are other men, other people. 50% of IVF is because of male infertility. And
Hmm.
not even knowing that, just those things right there kind of put you at ease a little bit to know you're not on it by yourself. But also listen to your doctors.
Yes,
I would encourage people to listen to your doctors and talk to your doctors. There's a lot of information on the internet, but you can go down a rabbit hole on the internet because
absolutely.
it's unfiltered.
Yeah. I
And
think
you
it's
can,
it's trusting the process of who you've decided to use it for that medical support and intervention, and actually that you get so many voices and so many people giving you opinions and ideas, and Google giving you such information that actually that overwhelm in itself can be detrimental. So yeah, sort of almost just listening to one pathway and taking on that board that advice, and then adding in other maybe holistic therapies if you need to support yourself. But
yeah, yes. And when you've been said, do the research. If you're going to get involved, do the research. Don't just find the article you like or
no,
find the thing you like. And that's what we often tend to do. And I did it a few times. It's like find the thing that most relates to me. Like, oh, that's it
absolutely.
right there. And you're like,
And put all your beliefs into that one particular article or that one book because that's something that resonates with you. But actually, it's about being open-minded and then working out which pathway you trust and want to stick on.
And that's what I would advise men to be open-minded about this entire process. Be
Yeah,
open-minded about it. Once again, don't go into a rabbit hole and find out what you want to find out and then lean on that and try to hold on tight to that because then you're going to set yourself up for disappointment because
absolutely.
you
And
be
that
open-minded.
manifests later on, doesn't it? And you might at one point be on really high, and then if something doesn't quite go the way that you're expecting it to go, then you get to that real low position, and then it's finding your way back up to the sort of the neutral and above again. So yeah,
Yeah, because naturally it's going to be a roller coaster going through IVF anyway, for the most part. So definitely don't want to like create any extra on yourself.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. So I find out it's smell factor, and then we go through the process, and I have to do what's called a TESI. And what a TESI is basically they extract and they pull the semen out of me, and then
Right.
they store it in a freezer for us to use later on. So that was the experience, going to the hospital and having to, have that experience. And goes back to what I said before, like who do you talk to about that?
Yeah,
We talked about they're
that
going to go
stigma.
inside me and do that.
Exactly, that huge, well, stigma generally, but I think with males generally it's really hard for men to be open and honest that the issue is more leaning on their side maybe. Yeah, that's so yeah, gosh. And
Yeah.
how
So
did
so
that
truth be
affect your
told,
identity? Did that affect
yeah.
your
So
identity and who you felt that you were?
I think this. I think that I'm secure in who I am. I'm definitely thankful for the journey I've had in life, and it's built the man who I am today. It just taught me to just change my perspective on what fatherhood meant. And that's kind of how it changed me a little bit because I had to think about, what does fatherhood actually mean? Because in the sense of me having my own kids, it might not be I might not have an opportunity to do that.
Hmm.
So just trying to redefine what that actually means to me. And then also trying to figure out if I can have kids, how can my wife and I have the best quality life ever? So those
Amazing.
things about my journey changed because the journey that you present in your mind is, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to do all
A
these
fairy
things.
tale. Yes.
Yeah. And we're all realistic that certain things don't happen, but then this right here doesn't come to your mind of not happening. you
Yeah.
know,
Wow.
you think
Gosh.
that having a kids, is one of those things that happen or it just automatically happens, right? So that perspective had to change a lot just on what happiness and what the journey looked like. And if it was a possibility that I couldn't have kids, how can I still manage and have a great life with myself and my wife?
Amazing. Wow, that's so powerful. And I love how now you're creating that space for men to be able to talk about this openly and honestly and just, understanding their own emotions and thoughts and feelings. That's really important.
Yeah, because there's nothing to be ashamed of at all. I mean, it's medical. It's like anything else. I think if you're diagnosed with a sprained ankle, you're diagnosed with, anything, it's all medical and you can't control those things.
Hmm.
So that's where it becomes something that you shouldn't be embarrassed about. It's part of
Absolutely.
life. But at the same time, I get, the thought process of what people think masculinity is. And I think when you say, I'm going to have kids, this is how you do it. You've been taught since, whenever in middle school that this is how you have kids. So I think those things have to you know, disappear from your mind and say, okay, this is not my journey. My journey look a little bit different,
Yeah.
and then I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, it's about being adaptable and flexible and realistic. And
Yes,
not everything in life happens the way you expect it to happen, in the way you expect it to happen, and in the order
of
you
course.
expect it to happen.
Yeah,
Life is here to test us, and clearly this was a very big test for you and your wife in the relationship.
yes.
How were you able to help and support your wife going through the journey as well when there was a lot of pressure on you as the male? How did that pan out?
Yeah, I think that's where I really had to grow as a person, as a man, because you do have a little guilt that it's male factor, and the reason why you're even going through this entire process is because of you. Now, once again, my wife never ever once mentioned that or muttered it or even made me feel like she assumed that, but it's all in my mind that okay,
Absolutely.
I'm watching my wife. If anyone knows the IVF process, you have to take so many shots per day with a needle, whatever routine you're going through or procedure you're going through, and then watching her go back and forth to doctor's appointments and things of that nature. A little bit of guilt set in because, no matter what I think or what I say to myself about motivation, I am the reason we're here. And I'm
Mm.
watching my partner go through all this, so you have to like balance out, once again, like I said in the beginning, taking care of yourself, but taking care of your partner. Because what you want to do is you want to overcompensate because it's quote unquote the reason you guys are there. So you want to make sure you're doing everything for your partner. You're talking to him, you're there, you're doing all these things, but you oftentimes neglect yourself because you don't want to feel guilty about feeling sorry for yourself.
Absolutely.
you
And
know?
guilt is such a huge emotion, isn't it? It can have such side effects and knock-on effects that it's really hard. And that's something that I support my clients with, and that big feeling of guilt, when it's from the female point of view, because those are who my clients are. But
Yeah.
that guilty, will I ever be able to give my partner the child that they want, or give my family, or, my community? So
Yeah.
yeah, if you wouldn't mind expanding maybe a little bit more on guilt, because I think that's a really common emotion that a lot of our listeners will be feeling at this moment in time.
Yeah, so I had, a few phases of guilt. I had the guilt of knowing that once again, the reason why we're here in the first place is because of me. So I had the
Right.
guilt of like once again, watching my wife go through all that process and go through all those things. And it's technically, I'm the reason, right? So you have guilt because of that. Then you have guilt because you're watching your partner go through all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you have a loss, like we had four miscarriages when you wanted to feel bad for yourself because it does hurt because these are my loss too. You feel guilty because you're like, well, she lost something and she's going through it physically and emotionally. So how dare you, Corey, feel guilty about it? I feel bad for yourself. I feel
It,
sorry when she's going through so much more than you are,
I mean,
technically.
it's a double act, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
you've got your feelings and your sorrow and your guilt and your overwhelm, and so has she, and then you've got the guilt for her, and she's probably got the guilt for you, and it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like a juggling act, isn't it? But actually, at the end of the day, what's the most important thing is that the two of you are supporting each other
Yes.
and you're being honest and open with with each other as well as with your
Yes.
own self, because I think
Hmm.
you're not honest with yourself and you don't tune into your own feelings and emotions and deal with them. That's going to have a knock-on effect into how you are able to successfully support your partner or wife or
Because you want to turn off your feelings because your partner's, once again, physically going through all the shots, going through all the appointments, mentally, is carrying the burden of,
Absolutely.
transfers. So you want to hide your feelings because you don't have which my thought was, I don't have time to have feelings. I got to
No.
focus on my wife. But what I was doing was damaging everything involved.
By trying to hide your feelings. So
Yeah.
actually, I think a message for our listeners, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is actually our feelings are really important and validated, whether you're the male or the female, whether it's an issue because of the male or because of the female. Actually, feelings are really important, and they're not to be squashed and hidden. They're actually to be explored and encouraged, because
Yes.
feelings, can help guide us in the best possible way forward. And if we suppress them, we're only sort of covering up something that's going to get uncovered at some point later on.
Yes. 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 And because we went through so many, it it, it gave me opportunity to learn, which, I could learn another way. But, after the second or third one, I realized I have to start opening up. After the second and third lawsuit we had, I had to start
Yes.
opening up because I was holding stuff in, and I was actually, what you just said before, it's going to come out eventually. I don't care. At some point in time, it's going to come out that you're holding it in. And when you started seeping out here and there, because now, I'm losing my empathy. I'm losing my patience on certain aspects and
Yeah.
things that I shouldn't even have to lose patience about. But it wasn't me becoming a bad person. Once again, those feelings were seeping out. You're trying to
Absolutely.
suppress them, and you can't do that. And another
Can't.
thing I learned from my perspective was also that every time my wife wanted to talk, and it wasn't about her trying to find a solution or trying to find a way for me to fix it. But I thought that was my job. Once again, the
To fix
guilt,
it, to be the
all that's
fixer.
like, well, okay, here's my chance to help out. I'm on the sideline, my chance to help out. So I'm going to fix what you're talking about. And what I had to learn was, no, sometimes she just want me to just listen and be quiet.
Yeah.
And so when it got to a point, I would ask her, do you want me to listen or do you want advice? And that's ways I became a better partner and learned that everything doesn't have to be a solution. Sometimes it's a conversation just to get out your system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all try and be fixers, whether it's as a parent or a partner. You just want to fix the problem, because if the
Yes.
problem's fixed, then we feel great that we've fixed it and we think that it's been fixed. But actually, that we don't always have to fix the problem. We just have to talk
Yeah.
through it and understand how each other are thinking or feeling, and being that supportive partner, which clearly you and your wife had that really incredible, strong relationship, and being able to do that.
Yes.
Um, a lot of people don't,
Mhm.
that's when relationships start to break down and problems start occurring outside of the fertility journey, because it's the relationship between the partners is breaking down.
Yeah, and I could definitely see, from perspective of, I can see how relationships can break down because of IVF, because
Absolutely.
there is so much emotion going on, and it's such a roller coaster up and down.
Oh
There's
my
so much
gosh.
uncertainty, and if you don't talk about those things, it would affect you so much
It will
because of
begin
the roller
eating
coaster.
away. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and once again, just having a great partner was amazing, but also I think there was me also needing to find an outside source also
Yes,
because
that's what was my next question. Did you
yeah.
you source any other holistic or any other therapies to help, offload to somebody else? Was that something that you found useful?
No, I wish I would have found someone like you to do that. No, I didn't find that. And that's what I want men to encourage them to do. Go seek and find it. And the reason why I kind of found it on accident was because I met a guy at a clinic and he was going
Right.
through the same exact thing I was going through. And it was one of the best experiences I had
You
because
bonded
there was
immediately with a joint story, if that makes
oh
sense.
my goodness,
Yeah.
so relatability and thinking about it. And I would advise, men to either seek out other men who are going through it or seek out, therapy who can relate to IVF.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
IVF and going
That's,
through the
yeah,
infertility space. It's not just a regular therapist. No, this has to be specific, I think, me personally, because
absolutely.
I've been in therapy since 2008. This is different.
It's
This is
different.
totally different.
Yeah.
You need someone who has experience in
Empathy.
this area
Yeah.
because there are so many variables there that only people who have gone through it, who have studied, can understand those variables.
100%. Well, that's why I became a fertility coach and holistic therapist. It was due to my difficult, struggled fertility journey.
Yes.
I'm blessed with two beautiful children now, but we went through multiple rounds of fresh, frozen, IVF treatments. We had a miscarriage at 12-week scan. Pretty much went through the whole roller coaster of a journey. And so I find that my clients tend to get drawn towards me because they know, although it's not their story, is not my story is not their story. We're all unique in our own stories, but they know that I know what they're going through. And so when they talk to me and I, help guide them and support them in the best possible way, they know that I'm talking from my heart and from an understanding, a genuine experience that I've been through myself.
Yeah. Yes. And because you can talk the language, it's a totally different language out here when you're doing IVF, the blastophase, embryos.
Absolutely.
Tessie,
we need a dictionary. We need an Oxford dictionary of fertility terminology, don't we? I mean, there are glossaries out there, but I don't think a glossary is going to be doing it. Yeah, there's huge amount of terminology to come to terms with.
And that's where the relatability, when a guy was like talking about a Tessie or talking about, there's different aspects of it, having the same conversation, same lingo, you're like, oh my gosh, feels good. Because to the outside world who's not experienced IVF, they have never heard these words before.
No.
I had never heard these words before prior to me going through it. No. So when you try to explain to someone who's not in this world of IVF, they can't relate at all.
No.
And what they're going to do
is hugely overwhelming, because if you don't understand a language and you're being put inside, it's like being lifted up and being put into a foreign country where you have no idea what they're talking about, and you're having various procedures and conversations taking place, but you don't know what the language is. So it's really, and that in itself is stressful, really stressful and overwhelming. And we know how stress affects the hormones and the cortisol level and it's really can do quite a lot of damage to the body.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And that's like another thing that, about the stress. Because my wife was going through the transfers or going through doing egg retrievals, you try to limit the stress in the house. And that, once again, goes back to suppressing things and holding things in. You may have had the worst day at work, or you may have had the worst day where someone said something about IVF that really bothered you. But you got to go in your house and figure out, okay, do I bring this up to her right now? Like, she looked like she's having a great day. She's smiling right now. Do I actually want to bring this up? So you end up holding things in. And, once again, my wife was open to talking about things at any point in time. But once again, you're like, I don't want to bring this up. I don't want to cause any more stress. She's already stressed out. Yeah. I don't want to bring anything
you don't
to
want
the
to
house.
Add to it. Yeah.
Add to it at all. Like I said, then talking to friends about it was overwhelming because they don't know anything about it. So you explain things to them and they're telling you, well, just relax, or just do a flip, or just go outside and eat some eggs. They give you all this advice about it. And that becomes annoying.
Friends, family who are aware that of what one's going through on a fertility journey can, with all good intentions, can give the most wonderful advice according to them. But actually that wonderful advice can be the most triggering of just relax, go on holiday. It's going to happen. Don't worry. You've fallen pregnant before. It doesn't matter. You've had a miscarriage. You're going to fall pregnant. It's the comments that they are saying with all good intentions, but actually it's possibly the worst comments and the most triggering and upsetting comments.
It is the worst. So that causes you to recoil and not even bring it up anymore. And then also, you don't want the questions of people calling you, did it happen yet? Did it happen? What's going on? What's happening? And you're still processing all of it. Like you might have just had like a call from the doctor saying, it didn't implant. And someone calls you, what happened? What happened? You're like, and you got to explain the whole thing as you're trying to process it. So that's once again why I wrote the book, to give men a little bit of relief and reprieve. And it also talks about in the book, what you willing to talk about and what you're not willing to talk about. Set those groundwork early.
Set the boundaries. Set the boundaries.
If you decide to bring it up to your friends and family members, set the boundaries of what you want to talk about. And no questions are good questions. No. And those are the things you have to do to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
If you want them to get involved, if you say to them, like, you can't respect those boundaries, then just I'll let you know as needed basis. But if you're willing to, then you can go on a journey with us. Because the worst thing you can do is have an ask a bunch of questions about what happened, and you have as you're still trying to process it.
Yeah, I mean, what I said to my clients, if they choose to tell certain friends or family members, obviously that's great. That's up to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, to make it very clear that, you know, you're parting some information to them, but there are boundaries to that information. And actually, you will give them the information when you feel ready and it's right for you to get that information, but you don't actually need them to ask you follow-up questions.
No,
But then
no, not at all.
you've got the flip side. I had a client yesterday who was talking about the elephant in the room, where you haven't told certain family
Oh,
or friends,
yes,
but
yes.
you know that they know that you're going through difficult fertility journey. You know that they know. They don't want to say anything, but you come out of there and you think it's sort of that elephant in the room, but not being discussed.
Yes. That is something right there where like we did a few things. One of our transfers was done prior to our wedding.
Wow.
And, you know, not being able to tell anybody about what's going on. And actually, the day prior, we were doing our wedding planning, and we had a transfer 14 days prior to the planning date, and we get to notice that the transfer didn't get complete. And so you're sitting there in front of the wedding planner as you get this phone call about, you know, it didn't happen. So now you got to continue to plan this wedding with that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And like that
Put
was
on that
difficult.
mask. Put the mask on.
And speaking of masks, I'll share with you another situation where we had a transfer that didn't work, and we got the call that it didn't work on a Friday, and then that Saturday was a pre-planned Halloween party at my wife's job. So we had to go. My wife's an optometrist, so we had to go to her office and host a Halloween party with a bunch of kids.
With a bunch of kids, knowing that you're.
With a bunch of
Oh
kids.
my gosh! So
And
that
we
mask
just got the
really,
word.
that genuine and that fake mask had to be absolutely slapped on your face.
What's the irony of that? A real mask for that whole day to pretend like as if you're not hurting right now because you just received some devastating news. So it's just processing all those things, all those emotions. You have to seek some outside help with
Absolutely.
that. It's not to be taken internally because it'll eat yourself up in so many ways.
Yeah. Is there any specific outside help that you could recommend for your male listeners to not specific people, but was it like a coach or a therapist, or did you find something like maybe acupuncture or reflexology or EFT, hypnotherapy, which is what I offer? Or was there anything?
Yeah, I didn't find anything while I was going through it. It was after I went through it and I wrote this book, and I was like, let me go find some stuff for me to look at.
Now, you've mentioned the book. You've mentioned the book quite a few times. Can you mention the name? Is the IVF
Playbook for Men.
IVF Playbook for Men. Brilliant. And for your male listeners, what would the book give them?
That's kind of what I was, you know, in this whole conversation. I wasn't necessarily trying to like plug the book, but I was just trying to give them information on what's in the book.
Yes.
I understand like what to go through. And I was like, what am I referencing? So I was referencing the book because, you know, I just want them to know like these are the things in the book about how to process things, how to talk to friends.
Absolutely.
It has a ton of medical terms in there also. It's basically everything that I would have want to know prior to going through IVF. So I have like a lot of medical terms, and I talk to doctors, and I have everything sourced so you can like actually understand what the doctor's talking about. Because that's another thing too. You know, when a doctor says something about something, whatever it can be, medical, whatever, you don't want to ask questions, which you should. But
sometimes the questions might not be there in your head when you're sitting with the doctor, but when you leave the room and you talk about it and you process it, those questions might suddenly start coming through.
Yes, that's what happens. If you don't have access to your doctor, now you got to go home and, like you said, go to Google University, and there becomes a rabbit hole right there.
Yes.
So it just gives you a list of things, and it talks about when you're in a doctor's appointment, ask questions and follow-up questions. And once again, if you have a question that you don't know the answer to, wait until you have that appointment again, or send a doctor a note.
Absolutely.
You know, be careful on going online and looking up stuff because once again, there's so many different things there. So it just talks about those things. It also talks about, you know, my journey of going through IVF and how I felt. And hopefully, you know, it might not be exact the same journey as mine, but maybe it relates a little bit.
Absolutely.
Maybe it sounds something in that journey sounds the same.
Yeah. And even if you know, hopefully you won't, but if you needed to go through another journey going forward, that journey is going to be different to your first journey.
Yes.
So no journey is the same, but there will be obviously overlaps and and it's really important. because, we haven't really discussed the word trauma here. Something that I'm also a trauma-informed coach. And, we all go through trauma, whether it's acute trauma or generalized trauma or, developed trauma. And trauma can hold itself, and sit in the body and, stay very low key. But sometimes it can trigger. And that's when, if we've not dealt with the trauma of, well, in this particular case, the trauma of the difficulty in conceiving, or the trauma of the IVF journey, as in your case and my case. So, dealing with trauma is really, really an important part of the process. And that's something that, a specialized coach or counselor or psychotherapist or somebody can really help, to help the trauma.
You're right. So we had a total of 4 failed transfers.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the trauma that comes with 4 failed transfers, each time that you have those failed transfers, even up until, thankful to have a son now, even up to that process, I didn't think it was going to happen until he came out crying.
Yeah.
Because of the trauma that I had of the, you get a good signal, but then you realize, oh, it's not working.
Yeah.
You get these positive, it's not working. Yeah. So then you got to figure out how to temper your thought process. Yeah. And in every appointment we would go to, after we found that she was pregnant, I hold my breath the entire time. And that's not healthy, no. For so many ways, not just because healthily, but like mentally.
Absolutely.
How could I manage this stress that I was still feeling, even though we knew she was pregnant? Each month, each ultrasound, I'm nervous because once again, we had 4 failed transfers.
Yeah. So until you're holding that baby in your own arms and it's safe, it's not just about the falling pregnant. That's one element. That's just one element. That's just one part of the story. It's actually seeing the pregnancy through all the way through the very different, all the various milestones throughout the pregnancy, and then actually holding the baby. And that in itself, is for you and the male partner and the wife, because holding on to trauma can have its negative effects if it's not dealt with properly.
Yes, that's another thing, just holding that trauma of not want to tell anybody. Like, I didn't want to say anything about her even being pregnant until I wanted to wait to the 9th month, but things happen. So anyway, because you've had so many disappointments. Like our first time that we had a transfer, and all these medical terms, of course, you can figure it out. It's HCC readings. The first one we had after you do the transfer. For those who don't know or may know, do the transfer. Had to wait 14 days to see if the pregnancy is viable, and then they do about HGC readings. Yes. The first time we went, we had an okay HCC reading. It was like, okay, all right, it's not the greatest, but hey, we have something here. Let's go. And then
it doubles and doubles, isn't it? Yeah.
And it doubles and doubles and doubles.
If it's viable.
Yeah. So, 2 days later, we go back to see if it doubles, to see if it's viable. And the number actually went down.
Right.
So now we learned that it wasn't a viable pregnancy.
It was a chemical.
And what was scary about that was the numbers didn't go back to 0. It stayed at a certain number, which now they're telling us it may be an ectopical pregnancy.
Right.
What the heck is an ectopical pregnancy? You know what I mean? Like, what is this stuff? Every week, every time I went through the experience, and it was something new. Yeah. I never heard of that before in my life. No.
It's constant hurdles all the way. A roller coaster actually is almost too good to describe it, because that just goes round and round and round. This is a very turbulent roller coaster. That's really, 1 minute you think you've got it, something else happens, and another. It's got the highs and the lows all the way through.
Yeah, and that's where, and so we get that, and it's like, okay, and then it finally goes to 0. Then we have another transfer a few months later. So after having the first fail, when you're like, okay, you stay a little bit confident. So, okay, that didn't happen, maybe because of the first try, but we got a reading, which is a good sign. So you're on a roller coaster. Okay, it didn't happen. Okay, but let's get back up. All right, let's go. So go to the second transfer, and once again positive, and then 14 days later to see what the HTC reading was, it was a 0. It never even implanted at all. Right. And you're like, what the heck was that? Once again, you have no clue what's going on, because you had a reading, they have no reading at all. Yeah. So, just going through that first 2 was like, they're polar opposites. You had a reading, then no reading.
Yeah.
So now you're like in such a limbo, and the doctors, once again, can't give you much information because it's all new. IVF is still a new science.
Absolutely.
And because my wife didn't have any underlying health issues, the embryos were healthy, everything that had been genetically tested, everything was great. There was no explanation for this.
No.
The worst thing to have in life is no explanations. When I played professional football, you can explain everything that happened. If
Yeah.
you missed a pass, you didn't put your hand in the right
There was a
place.
reason. There was a
Yeah.
reason. An answer. There was an answer. But here it's such an unknown. Amazing.
Not so then we go into
Wow.
our the third procedure transfer, and we're just all over the place at this point in time. Because once again, then you kind of like find a little bit of comfort, like, okay, maybe there was something wrong with that second embryo, why it didn't take. So let's just take that one out of the context. Okay, we had a great reading. The second one, maybe something wrong with that embryo. Now we got a third one. Let's go. Let's go. So we're still motivated and ready to go. But at the same time, this is our last embryo that we have at this point in time. So go into it optimistic again, because you don't want to go into the transfer pessimistic. You want to stay positive, but you want to be
Absolutely.
tempered in your
Positivity and
emotions.
mindset, really, really key things here. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do the transfer, and 14 days later, we get some good news. We had a pretty good HEC reading. So we're like, oh man, excited about this.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, all
absolutely.
right.
Quite
And now you
validated. Yeah.
And now you kind of explain to yourself what happened. Okay, the first one was probably because of the first time and her body hadn't used to it. Then the second time, that maybe something wrong with that embryo. So here we go. The third one, it's working, it's fine. Because now you see that number rise and you're like, all right,
The
good.
hope. The hope.
Yeah, the hope is there. And then we go for two more days later to see if the numbers are doubled, and the numbers actually drop back down. So
So
this
another
pregnancy wasn't
bad sign.
viable either.
Mm,
So you talk
gosh,
about getting the wind kicked out of your stomach.
absolutely.
It is something to process there, to have
Mm,
three unsuccessful transfers
yeah.
with no explanation on why they were that way.
No.
And you have doctors, and our doctors were great. We went to, she was amazing. She was great. Everyone there was great. But once again, we couldn't explain what was going on.
No. But we
So
do
now
have a
it's,
happy ending to this story, don't we?
yeah. So we do it, two more times. Well, one more time and it didn't work. And then the last one, but it's a trauma.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Absolute
it's trauma
trauma.
going through this.
Yeah.
It's trauma. And one time my wife and I talked about this on how we have to protect ourselves and each other, because we said to ourselves, if we don't protect ourselves and we happen to have a baby, who's going to be there to take care of the baby? Because we're
Absolutely.
so traumatized by the entire experience. You're
Yeah.
so, and that's what we had to realize, that if it does happen for us, we have to figure out prior to having a baby, we are there mentally and physically, because
Absolutely.
this
And
process is
yeah. And
draining.
talking about the physical support that you and your wife gave yourselves, were there any particular supplements that you were taking, or anything that you were told that was, really quite crucial for you both to have to help improve chances of egg and sperm quality or motility or morphology?
No, not really, because everything that we had was great.
Okay.
Our egg acknowledgement was great. Everything was great on paper. And
Hmm.
once again, my wife didn't have any underlying health issues. She didn't have high blood pressure, have
No.
diabetes, anything like that. She's great in health. So there wasn't anything specific, to do. Me personally, working out was amazing for me to get
Yeah.
away and ride my bike. I'm an avid bike rider.
Hmm.
So for an hour, I was just a bike rider. I wasn't someone going through IVF,
No.
because, my wife, I talked about this before. It's like, okay, let's make sure that we don't let IVF control our lives. Let's make sure we focus on other
Live.
things too.
Absolutely. The living whilst waiting is really, really
Yeah,
key, because if you don't have a life outside of the IVF journey, it's going to be really hard to travel that journey. Otherwise, it becomes so obsessive and everything just becomes so focused on a goal that it might not is not really a goal, because we can't make falling pregnant a goal. It's a desire, it's an intention, but
yes,
so it's really important. This is something I work on really closely with my clients, is to look at what's going on in their lives that's nothing to do with falling pregnant or having the baby. Because if those things are aligned and they have other focuses, then other things in their body and the way they feel and behave will start to shift, which will then create a healthier, fertile, environment.
yeah.
Um,
And we did that. We're like, okay, we were like, one day, we're like, okay, we're going to make sure on a Sunday, I never forget that. We're like, okay, we're going to make sure we start to process this, but not let IVF control our life, not let
no,
having a kid control our life. Let's just
yeah,
get it together and go. We get in our car and leave and make a right. And there's a big billboard of a baby with diapers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, how do you escape it, right? You're constantly reminded you're going through IVF.
Of course.
So we had to
Reminders
figure
are
out
everywhere.
everywhere. So you got to figure out, you can't just block it out.
No.
You got to figure out how to manage it as you're going
You got
through
to
it.
embrace it. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
before we wrap up, so just a couple of other things, just to let my listeners know that I work alongside a test-based global nutrition company, and it is really important to look at what supplements you are putting in your body, making sure that they are really good quality supplements and not filled with bulking agents or other rubbish that often they
Yes.
are, and to really just do your research and make sure that when you are told to take various supplements, really to check the source of those supplements and what goes in them. I am an advocate and a firm believer that it should be all natural and food based where possible, and so the test-based nutrition company that I work alongside have a fertility component to it, and it's all about good quality omega-3, for argument's sake, that's really important, that helps bring down inflammation, a good quality gut health supplement, a good quality all-rounded mineral and vitamin, but it's all food-based and natural and contains really high levels of DHA or EPA, to help bring down the inflammation. So if anyone, is taking supplements, the male and the female, to help the reproductive area become less inflamed and more favorable, it's really important to do your research as to what you're putting in your body, because sometimes you could be putting more damage and harm than good.
Yes, and that's why I looked you up, because I was like, I wish I'd had this
Yeah.
around when I was going through it. So I'm definitely a fan of yours. I'm a fan of what you do, and a
Yeah.
fan of what you're talking about,
So
because
if anyone wants
I
to
wish.
find, well, please God, that next time we will get you and your wife physically and emotionally prepared and ready. But if anyone wants to find out more about the supplements that I advocate, then please do feel free to reach out to me separately. So I think it's probably good opportunity to almost wrap up in a moment, Corey. But for our listeners, I think a few things that have come out of this conversation, and please feel free to correct me or elaborate on it. First of all, you're not alone. You might feel alone, but you're not alone. And it's really important to reach out for your support, whether that be from friends, family, colleagues, or a therapist such as myself. It's really, would you agree on that one? That was one point, I think.
Yes,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Reach out and talk
yeah,
to someone, but talk to someone who specializes in IVF. This
absolutely.
process and male factor fertility, if you do it,
Yeah,
you want to talk to somebody specialized in it, because
yeah.
it's important. They know the language, they know the lingo.
Absolutely. And second of all, another point, I think that's come out of here, um, your emotions and feelings are absolutely valid. It doesn't matter what emotion you're feeling, whether it's, you're guilty, overwhelmed, upset, jealous. We all carry emotions all the time, and they are absolutely validated and really important. So not to feel embarrassed of them, not to try and hide them, but actually to embrace them, accept them, and learn how to use them going forward in a positive way. Does that feel
Oh,
something?
oh, oh, yeah, yes, yes. You're gonna have every feeling possible: mad, angry, sad,
Yeah,
everything. You're even gonna have feelings you didn't know exist, but it's okay. And and
absolutely.
and people like me can tell you, I had those same feelings.
Yeah.
I had those same thoughts. So that's what you're gonna find. It's
And we're going to
okay,
have a
because
range of feelings throughout. And then finally, your presence with your partner is absolutely more important than perfection. Don't
mm,
feel it's you don't need to fix the solution. You just need to
mhm.
be there, be present, whether it's the female for the male, or females together and males together, whatever the journey is. It's really important that you're not don't always necessarily see yourself as the fixer of the solution, but actually you are there to be your presence is there. Is that something?
That's amazing. I think that to add to that is to listen without judgment. Have a safe space. Your
Hmm.
partner, both of you guys have to be the safe space, because the outside world doesn't know much about IVF. You two have to have a safe space where you can talk about any and every single thing and not be judged for it.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest thing.
That's the biggest, huge. So this brings us towards the end, Corey. I maybe this was the start of a beautiful series of podcasts going forward with you. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you for bringing your heart to this conversation. I know that your story is going to help a huge amount of listeners out there. Just go back to the book, the IVF Playbook for Men. Where can the listeners access that? Is that from Amazon or?
Yeah, you can go to the website, IVF Playbook for Men. You can go to the Facebook page or Instagram page with the same title, and you can find the bio and the link in the bio of IVF Playbook for Men. You can get it anywhere, but like I said, just go to my website with the title or the social media, same thing.
Okay, brilliant. And then if anyone wants to get in touch with me, if you haven't heard before this podcast, I'm Laura at fertilityavenue.co.uk. My website is www.fertilityavenue.co.uk. And to everyone listening, whether you are on your journey or maybe you know somebody that's on this journey, just to know that there is space for your story. Okay. Healing doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we show up together. Yes. And that's my final message to the listeners today. And before we leave, just a huge thank you to Corey for coming on the podcast today. Really, really appreciate it. Have you got a final message you would like to?
Just like you said, you're not alone, and talk to someone, including your partner.
Okay. Thank you so much, Corey. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to, as I say, future podcasts with you.
Thank you.
Bye for now for everybody.
Bye-bye.